This is the heartbeat of human services, a peek into the inspiring stories of our community and all things DHS. Join us.
Hi, everybody. I'm the host of The Heartbeat of Human Services. My name's Jana Slagle, and today our guest is Dr. Yeun. And Dr. Yeun, you have an amazing letters behind your name and all kinds of things that you've done. I know that you are a professor at Stanford. Is that accurate?
Adjunct associate professor
Okay.
currently, yes.
Okay. And can you just give us a little bit about your background?
Well, of course. I
Thank you.
am a board certified sleep medicine physician, and I've done part of my training, my postdoctorate degree at Stanford for sleep. I'm currently employed actually at UCSF as a clinical assistant professor, and I do help teach postgraduate fellows about sleep.
Okay, awesome. This September, we at the Department of Human Services are focusing on student sleep health. We're trying to let the community know how important health sleep is for their students. And we particularly work directly with the foster care community. So, foster parents and foster youth and social workers are part of our audience too. So, but when you and I were speaking briefly, you were telling me that this topic is a passion of yours. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I'd love
Yes.
to hear more about that.
Of course, I think that sleep in general is undervalued in society, particularly in the United States. And part of the challenges of working with children, youth, and so on, with the pandemic, there is such a high increase in mental stress, whether it's depression, anxiety, on top of how little sleep they've been getting all along. And I think the two tend to snowball together. The less sleep we have, the more mental stress we have, and the less able we are to handle day to day situations and challenges. So I think it's really important that we put sleep as a priority because the more we have, the more refreshed we feel, the more able we are going to handle the day to day little things, nicks and cuts here and there. We'll brush it off, but we have better sleep, we have better mental attitude.
It makes total sense. And yet, like you said, in America, I'm not exactly sure why we don't prioritize sleep, but some of the things that we've read about and learned are people are glued to their phones, they're doing gaming, and, youth as well. They're staying on their phones with social media. And that may add to the reason they don't want to put down their phone at night and takes away some of their sleep. What would you say, or what have you learned about why people, don't prioritize their sleep?
Right. So there are a couple of thoughts. Number one is first things first, is that a lot of schools in the United States didn't start until 9 a.m. So a lot of times we don't know that. We just assume that school starts at 7, 7:30, 8, 8:30, whatever. And of course, the law now will allow school to start at 8:30, at least for high schoolers. So that's somewhat helpful. In terms of why the United States does not prioritize sleep as such, and I think it depends on the industry. There have been some industries that have awakened, so to speak, to the fact that they don't have productive workers if they are asleep on the job. And so that those that deal with public safety, for instance, have put more emphasis into ensuring that their employees and themselves get better sleep. Now, living in California, of course, it's hard to get away from the tech industry. And so the mentality is kind of, I'll sleep when I'm dead. But unfortunately, that could be a metaphor for disaster. And I like to say that the medical industry has wisened to the fact that it was not safe for healthcare workers to go without sleep for an extended period of time. It used to be badge of honor. It's kind of like show them I can do with so little sleep, therefore I am better than you, which is completely false belief system. But somehow that filters through the younger population. And the indoctrination is such that, well, I can do with very little sleep and survive. So let's see, you up me one. Um, so the other concept is that, again, social media reflects that trend, that look at all these perfect people doing perfect things. And I am one of them. So in some ways, it maybe envy, it could be aspirational. It could be showing that I have more friends than you, or whatever the craved quality is. But I think ultimately we're looking for companionship. We're looking for acceptance. So I think the message remains the same, is that we need human interaction to help us move along in our life's journey, whatever that looks like. And looking at the phone is very different from interacting in person. So for schools that have this semester implementing no cell phones in class, and there are various different reasons, pros and cons, in terms of why that policy may or may not be helpful, but they saw an improvement in attention span in their students, better interaction with peers, generally a positive attitude towards not being distracted by the phones and the phone's notifications. So if we're always looking at the phone for validation, how much sleep we have, how many steps we have taken, what our heart rates are, and what our grades are, there's always going to be competition. But do we want to be competing on every single front? It gets very exhausting.
That is so interesting. You're so right about the competition and the need for interaction. And doing that on a cell phone is really sort of a fake interaction, isn't it? It allows people to be someone that maybe they really aren't. I read that you also have a practice where you've been a clinician. And so when you have adults or children, as we're sort of speaking about today, or youth, what are some things that they struggle with, and why aren't they sleeping? When you come to you for help, what kind of things are you seeing, and how do you direct them when you are as a clinician?
Right, great question. So first of all, again, a message for educators and parents or guardians and those that may be in helping to coordinate the schedule of the youth or children, is that do not wait until the semester starts to get help. Usually when I would like to talk to the individuals would be right after the ending of the last semester before summer vacation starts. The reason being that part of the challenges, we all have challenges with our day-to-day schedule, but the ones that are challenged the most are kids or adults who are night owls. So, or they prefer the evening time. I'm sure you've encountered students that said, I cannot go to bed even if I wanted to. That's why I'm on my phone until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And they would sleep in the next day until 9, 10, noon, 1, I've heard sometimes on the weekends. So this is a population that's kind of permanently jet lagged because their internal biological clocks, like everybody else, they have certain genetic codes that tell them, are you going to be a morning person, in between, nighttime? And for those people that have the later clock, they struggle to go to sleep. And that may increase the anxiety level because they have no control over that. And on the other hand, when they cannot get up in the morning, they're very often labeled as unmotivated, not cooperative, or willingly disobey. So these are not the right messages, perhaps, particularly for the younger kids to hear, because they tend to be punitive. And to accept the fact that they have just a different clock from what the school schedule demands, and perhaps work around that with incentives to acknowledge and have them be heard. Because I have seen many now adults come in and would tell me that they were struggling in grade school, particularly in high school. In college, if they attend college, then they have more leeway in terms of when they can have classes. But prior to that, all classes are structured, and very often the bodies are in classes, but they are asleep or half asleep. So we know that in sleep, we don't, despite what the advertisement would say, you cannot learn in your sleep. And therefore, the bodies could be there if they make it to school, but very often they can't. So that would increase truancy rates, absenteeism, and now the whole snowballing effect. Again, the guardians or parents may now have challenges dealing with these individuals and creates all kinds of conflicts and worsening their mental health.
It's fascinating, really.
It's really hard. It's kind of like, particularly with teens, their minds are going, 1,000 revolutions per minute, and then you ask them stop. Well, it's impossible. And so I think that creates it's heartbreaking for me to see how
Mm,
many of them come in depressed, anxious,
mhm.
ruminating. And it didn't have to be this way.
Yeah,
Or when someone finally recognizes and tell them that there's nothing wrong with you.
right.
These are the conditions that cause you to be this way. You can see such a look of
A
relief.
relief. Wow, that is interesting how we do label people, and really it could be something they can't even control. I mean that's fascinating. I wonder, do you think that we have the ability to change that internal clock?
Oh, absolutely. We can modify. I think humans are adaptable. I like to kind of go back to caveman days because if we had no more food sources for survival reasons, we have to be able to migrate. However, we were going on foot. So therefore, the migratory rate tended to be slow. Nowadays, we are jetting around and the time changes are tremendous. But if we were going on vacation, the changes are rapid, but we're not at a certain time zone for a prolonged period of time unless we were immigrating. And however, the clocks are responsive, but they take time to reschedule. So I like to tell the young people that have delayed clocks is that, well, you're not permanently jet lagged, but you are jet lagged. So to help correct that, we need those summer months, that therefore right after summer vacation starts, and to try to correct the clock little by little. But we're too aggressive, which we had done in the past, it tends to backfire. So if we want to move a whole hour and force this individual to go to sleep an hour earlier, well, we've done that experiment, which is called daylight saving every spring, and we all have such difficulties. So I think the trick is to do it gradually over several months. By fall semester, when it starts, they will have an easier time. Now, don't get me wrong, the internal clock will always want what it wants. So, given a chance, if you pull all-nighter, if there's exams, anything major, your sleep may not be normalized right away. It may take a little bit. The other thing that students and parents should know is the fact that we cannot make up for sleep loss, no matter what people tell you, by just sleeping in during the weekends. Studies have shown that our memories, our motor skills, particularly for those that play sports, we do not recover with just 2 nights of sleeping in. So we are constantly running a deficit. But those that are highly motivated, male, female teens, and younger children as well, they can compensate by having motivation be a factor. Again, these are the individuals, despite being night owls, they can show up for 0 period, but understanding that they would do even better and be better mood if they didn't have to do this.
So, what are some of the motivational techniques that you've seen effective to change our sleep habits?
Well, number one, I think safety is a big one because for each individual, the needs will be different. There are some individuals that grow up with, they like having a little bit background noise, whether it is
Mhm.
white noise, whether it is hearing cars going by, not honking, of course. So if there's some background noise that they know they're safe, that's a signal. But then there are others that cannot sleep until it's totally silent. So whatever environment that they might be accustomed to, we may want to reproduce that. We definitely want the rooms to be a little bit cooler, not cold, but a little bit cooler. And we want them to wear clothing that's comfortable. And lastly, we also have light pollution to try to make our streets safer and to eliminate the roads better so the drivers can see. we very often have these high intensity lights that are white spectrum or blue spectrum shining outside the residence. Now, that might be helpful for drivers and pedestrians alike, but it may be harmful for people whose dwellings are adjacent. So there are higher reports of insomnia amongst people that are very sensitive to that light. And that can include the device like cell phones, tablets, and of course, computer screens, laptop screens, TVs are now gigantic. So anyone that might be susceptible to that blue spectrum light late at night, which are going to be teens, and should avoid them if possible. The bad news, though, is that a lot of these blue light blocking goggles that are out there have not really been as helpful as we thought they would be, unfortunately. So the best way is to avoid that screen time. And taking into account, again, because our temperatures tend to rise a little bit before we go to bed. And that's why when we get sick, we tend to have a fever, around the evening times. But that's also when people tend to communicate adult-wise, if there are any conflicts, they may want to resolve them after dinner, after the kids are put to bed. And if there are any kind of arguments, of course, we'd like to keep that behind closed doors and not expose the student to these conflicts, certainly not loud banging, loud noises and such, to try to keep that at a minimum, or table that for the next day so that these children and teens potentially are not being exposed to the uncertainty and conflict and creating more worries that may prevent them from going to sleep.
That's really good. So creating a safe environment, getting rid of the blue light. So if you live near blue light outdoors, maybe blackout curtains or something like that. And the sounds, I've noticed a trend in they use the sleep machines for their babies, and they do have the white or the brown noise. And I thought that I read recently that they're looking at, is that good? Is that not good? But you're saying that it could be helpful and it kind of depends on the person.
Right. So again, it depends. The sound machines for babies are a little bit controversial. If one were living in a neighborhood where they have no control, let's just say there's barking dog in the neighborhood that just, goes on all night, or if the parents, their conflict resolution styles are more argumentative, or there's a train that's certain to run by when the baby's sleeping. To mask some of those sounds, some of the sound machines can generate different types of sound. So they don't all have to be like the fan going. It could be waterfalls and something similar that's more soothing for the baby. The decibels are important. So we know that for babies, if they get exposed to louder sounds, it might impair their hearing when they're developing later on in life. So that may not be such a positive thing. How close the sound machine is also for the baby, the infant as well. And then furthermore, to ensure that, of course, the baby is not having any hearing issues to begin with, and whether the sound machines are going to be the way to go, because some babies prefer quietness. So each baby can tell you how best that they fall asleep. But a general rule of thumb for newborn babies, I tell parents, unless you wish to reproduce it thousands of times, it's probably best if the baby does not wish to have it not to start. So running the washing machine, driving around in the car, unless you want to do that every single night, find alternative ways to soothe your baby that does not require that as what we call sleep association. So don't let the baby associate that thing that you're doing as sleep. So that becomes a required condition. Similarly for adults, the less stuff that we put on ourselves. For instance, I'll tell my patients, if you need earplugs or noise canceling headphones, you need eye masks, you need blackout drapes, you need a sound machine, you need a weighted blanket, you need a special pillow. Are you going to lug everything with you wherever you go? It seems silly, right? It's just not reproducible. So the same thing applies to babies. the least amount of interference, and as long as they can soothe and teach them how to self-soothe, that will be a better way to go because then they
Right.
can do it on their own.
That's the goal. Yeah. So with our foster youth that we're always working with range from babies to, 18, 21. It sounds like everybody has their own way of learning to fall asleep and we all kind of need to discover that for ourselves and our children. So it's really an educational factor for parents and our foster parents to understand that not to be punitive if they're night owls. I love that. That was such a good message that everybody's going to be a little different. And then also the message about you can't catch up on sleep. I think I've heard that over and over again that you can, that the idea that you pull an all-nighter, well, you just sleep for 2 days and you kind of catch up, but that's not proven, is it?
No, when we especially analyze, not me personally, but the researchers look at so-called procedural skills and motor skills, they definitely after, so for instance, if they were sleep deprived for 3 or 4 nights, getting about 4 or 5 hours, and then they let them sleep in either for 2 nights for 10 hours or 5 nights for 10 hours, they were still not catching up. And so it's a mistake because we kind of base our system on pilots. When pilots used to have travel across time zones, how much time were they allowed to get better? And so typically they were giving about 3 days if they travel across several time zones and use that as a basis. But that's not fair because kids and adults are not the same. And more than one studies have shown that, particularly in teenagers, that they two things. Number one, their internal clocks are longer than adults. So the female teenager, maybe about 16 is when it peaks in being the longest. And the male teens is a little bit further, like 17. And so for an average teen, their internal clocks on top of everything else can be as long as 24 hours and 45 minutes. So imagine if you can go sleep at midnight one day, then the next day your clock says 12:45. And then the day after is going to be 1:30. Well, that's really a lot to deal with because not that you don't have a consistent bedtime, it's just that inside of you tells you something different. And no matter what you do, it's really hard to go to sleep. So that's why having a very regimented, which is typically what sleep specialists have been taught, it's like, oh, set a time to bed and stick to it no matter what, doesn't really apply to this population because they cannot have the same bedtime and be expected to have the same results. And so, but the opposite is also true in the morning, that the more we try to implement blue light that we want to avoid in the evening time, the stronger the message is to tell them that it's time to get up in the morning and lock that in. And then we gradually shift the time that they can go to sleep little by little, 15, 20 minutes at a time. And they have much higher success rate. So we want to reward the positive experiences where they can enjoy some success rather than, again, only focusing on the negative messaging.
I love that. I think the more that we talk about it, the more people are going to, understand the importance of it, of sleep health with regard to mental health and, as you said, remembering things in the classroom, and our brains just function better when we get enough sleep. And it's such a small thing, and yet it's not. It's just interesting, isn't it?
It's such a big part of our lives, yet we are looking at it as dispensable. And it's not.
Mm.
We've seen in animals that when they don't sleep enough, not only do they not do well, their immune systems get compromised and all kinds of diseases and inflammation can occur. Eventually, they just don't survive. So I think that to improve our overall health, I mean, we all have been through it. If we have gotten a really good night's sleep, boy, we're willing to go the next day. You feel like you conquered the world. So why wouldn't we want that for everybody, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for giving us some insight on how important sleep is. For our listeners, is there anything that you would suggest or direct people to learn more about, tips to help them get better sleep?
Absolutely. So American Academy of Sleep Medicine, along with the Sleep Research Society, represent clinicians and then also researchers about sleep. And then Sleep Foundation also is a great resource for simply written messaging about what one can do to improve one's sleep. So definitely go through all of those, one or all of those organizations to look for tips.
Awesome. We will link that on our website. And I thank you so much for your time today and just for opening our eyes and ears and hearts to just understanding how important sleep is. I am grateful that you came on today. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the Heartbeat of Human Services podcast today. We hope you'll join us next time.